Okay, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name is David Sturth with Cooperative Strategies. Thank you for joining our summer series here, continuation of our spring collaboration together, looking at preparing for the fall. As you know, we're moving into the time where over the summer we're focusing on interviewing folks who are really decision makers, and having those of you who've been on these calls really looking back to pull from you who have been listening in, who are really have the onus of responsibility to figure these things out for your respective states and districts, and just taking some time to take a deeper interview with you all to just hear more details. What information are you getting? What are you considering for different planning? What are the challenges that you're facing, that you're seeing on the ground, and allowing the interaction to happen with you all. So as last week we interviewed Julius Mugg with Europe, he's going to join us in about half an hour. And we're looking to set up this paradigm where every week we ask the previous week's participant to ask this week's interviewees some questions. So Julius will be joining us later in the meeting and can kind of wrap up by having him ask questions. And then next week we can ask one or more participants today from California Department of Education the same, and have that be a dialogue continue. The chat function here, we use that heavily as we get going. I'll be prompting some questions of our interviewees this afternoon, but really I just want to be one prompt for that. I would really appreciate and we'll rely on you all to provide some questions and comments as we go through. The chat is very helpful, as you know, for those of you who've been participating. So without further setup, want to welcome and introduce this afternoon Juan Mireles, who's the Director of School Facilities and Transportation for the California Department of Education. Has decades of experience working in the department and around in finance, in budgeting, in school facilities. So we are honored and very happy to have Juan here and his team. So and once allow them to introduce themselves here in just a minute. And Fred Yeager, assistant Juan Mireles in the School Facilities and Transportation Division, also really working with LAUSD, Los Angeles County, again with ample experience. And Jennifer Schwinn, who joined the team coming from a superintendent, joined in February, oversees 18 counties and working with 18 counties in California, and joined at quite an auspicious time, right before COVID hit. So very much look forward to her insights as well. So Juan, Fred, would you mind introducing yourself just a little bit and saying hello to folks, and Fred and Jennifer the same, and we'll get right into it.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Juan Mireles. I'm the Director of School Facilities and Transportation Services Division here at the California Department of Education. I've been involved in school facilities since 1998 in various areas here in California, from viewing eligibility and determining grant amounts for our state school facilities bond program, to working at the Department of Finance, overseeing school facilities and having other budget areas as well. And now I've had the privilege of being the director here for several years in the Department of Ed. I am also, I feel honored to be part of the National Council of School Facilities. I'm one of the board of directors. In fact, I am president-elect for this upcoming year to be able to help lead our efforts there at the National Council as well. And with that, I'll have Fred and Jennifer introduce themselves as well, please.
So, hi, this is Fred. My camera's not working suddenly, but that's probably all for the best. So, I'm with the CDE, been with CDE 22 and a half years or so. Started as in a position which Jennifer is now in, became assistant director a while ago, 2004, 2006, something like that, where I worked with the field reps that work with the districts, and as a side project, I deal directly with LA Unified, just because. And over the years prior to joining the state, I've worked in school districts, Stockton, Vallejo, and when I worked at the Grant Union High School District, I met Bernie Piaya, who I see is there. and then also worked with Kathleen Moore at her time at the department. So that's what I do.
Hi there, I'm Jennifer Schwinn. So I began working in education in the early 1990s as a teacher. I've taught elementary, middle, university levels, and been a principal. And in the later part of my career has been as a superintendent. I've worked in the Santa Cruz County and Sonoma County in California. And now really just very pleased, thrilled to be part of the team in the School Facilities and Transportation Division at the California Department of Ed. It's actually been, was a lifelong dream to get to the state at the end of my career. And so I'm very, very pleased to be part of this great team. And thanks for having me here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. And you all have been involved and very much appreciate the input since the beginning of this webinar series. And folks, again, this is very much your discussion. So as we get into it here, please fire away those questions and thoughts as we come, and we will address them in the chat. So just as you may have heard, California is a big place, and we've got a lot of schools, most in the country, 1,000 public school districts, over 10,000 public schools. So the folks here are looking at the challenges that we're facing at a pretty enormous scale, and so really interested in their feedback, what they're hearing. So we're just going to not belabor any more of the setup and get right into the discussion. So really want to know, Jennifer, Fred, and Juan, as you're preparing for all this and helping to draft the guidance for school districts, where are you getting your information? How are you sifting through all of this stuff that's out there to find the nuggets that really help inform your work?
Thank you. Early on, when the whole effects were felt by COVID-19, our Department of Ed started helping school districts. Our state superintendent of public instruction, Tony Thurman, early on said, even though our campuses may be closed, school remains open. So we launched a major effort to help our school districts really strengthen their distance learning programs. We started getting into a cadence of having weekly calls with the educators, with the associations to hear from the field. And we're also putting together webinars to help provide support mostly in the distance learning areas, again, to help strengthen the district's programs. And then the state superintendent created a statewide reopening schools task force. And this was basically to get folks from the many different areas in education, educators, school districts, representatives from the different associations that we have here in California, representing business officials, labor representatives, management representatives, county school superintendents, really a wide range of different folks to get together and to start to think about reopening schools and to help inform the department so that eventually we can get a guidebook out to our LEAs. As you mentioned, we are a very large state, very diverse, different areas, different, a lot of, you mentioned 1,000 school districts, 10,000 schools. So this really helped us start to take a look at what are the challenges out there, what are the questions that folks have, so that we can, as a department, put together some information to help schools be able to reopen. We also we have been partnering with the governor's office here, Governor Newsom here in California, with the California Department of Public Health, with the California Division of Occupational Safety.
Task, and they can go from the beginning to the
Go ahead.
Okay. And different representatives from the legislature as well that help, again, be all part of this task force. And what we did is we just released a little over a week ago our guidebook, which is called Stronger Together, a guidebook for the safe reopening of California's public schools. And this is how we gathered the information to put together this guidebook from all the different representatives. We just started to socialize the guidebook and get input as well from folks. But we recognize that there is no one size fits all here in California. We're encouraging, our school districts work directly with their local public health officials to make determinations about when to reopen. There's also sort of a how-to book, if you will, to give our districts more information as they develop their plans. We don't know yet, how the schools are going to reopen. Many of them are going to be doing different kinds of programs. That's one of the areas that we get into in our guidebook. We talk about, obviously, first and foremost is the health and safety of the students and staff, but then we also get into different instructional programs and what kind of delivery methods they're going to be having, and that will ultimately determine their space needs, right, when it comes to school facilities. So it's a pretty lengthy document that we put together to help LEAs in reopening. And to go back to your question, David, we got our information from working from our partners here in California from the many different areas in education to help us develop this guidebook.
Got it.
David,
and we
this is Fred.
Yeah, Fred.
And one of the, your question as to the information, and one thing we've all experienced is that there's no shortage of information, and it is just almost in some ways an unmanageable amount of information. And it sort of highlights the importance of a group like this, as well as the role of a state that can have a greater capacity than a school district to absorb that and process it and come up with it. So I think that's been an important part of the information filtering. Because on your note, we range from LA Unified from 600,000 kids to a districts of 3, 4, 5 kids with
Right.
limited capacity, and so they're looking for some help in dealing with the deluge of info.
Now, I would just like to add also other sources of information. I have felt that the work that we've done with NCSF and cooperative strategies has been very valuable. Part of my duty has been to try and collect all the information that is being sent out via fire hose. And it's been really useful to have that time to connect, network with other people around the country to hear their ideas. And so I want to thank you for the work that you all have been doing too. And also CASH, Coalition for Affordable School Housing in California, has also been a really a great agency to partner with to get information as well. And even agencies like Green Schoolyards of America, who are looking at creative ways to take learning outside, things like that. So there have been a lot of other agencies we've gathered information from as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, because that was really behind this question is that fire hose of information and how to make real sense of it, and that's helpful to kind of get your responses there. And you're working, looking at the chat, had some questions come in and about things like from Elika at Yost, looking at or working with partners in California. Did you also consult with your state health department? I thought I heard you said that, Juan, working with the state department. I didn't know if I heard that right.
Yes, that's correct. We worked very closely with the California Department of Public Health. We also set up a call with the county public health officials as well to get some information from them. But that is key for a lot of this guidance, particularly around health and safety and the guidance that they developed. We use that as part of our guidebook. So yes, we worked in collaboration with our public health officials.
Yeah, and just a macro level question and getting to talk with you all, looking at the state level there. One of the challenges that we see in guidance out there is not only that there's the variety itself, but the variety and specificity. So I'm really curious as to how did you all think about being specific and tactical enough so that people can take it off the shelf and run with it, while also not being too prescriptive. How did you strike that balance in terms of your guidance being broad enough to encompass diversity without being so broad as to leave too many questions?
Yeah, well, I'm sure we're not unique in the sense that we get pressure from some of our school districts that want more specificity while others want less.
Yeah,
and you're right,
exactly.
It is a balance, and that's one of the things that in our one of the work groups that we were part of with the health and safety work group, and we looked at what we called universal truths. What are things that are that apply to everyone, and where could the state come in and provide some guidance? We know that a lot of these things are going to depend on the local conditions, but there are some areas that maybe we couldn't, come in and provide some guidance, and that's what we try to pull out. We try to pull the different things that we could, knowing that a lot of the other areas are going to be dependent on each of those districts' local conditions. So it was not an easy task. We went through and we worked quite a bit. Again, this was a smaller subset. This group of the task force that the SPI had created, and our information helped to inform the health and safety section of the guidebook.
And so a tool that's in there is a health and safety checklist. So the idea was a school administrator could sit down with this checklist, and it would be a list of all the things that they need to think about, questions they need to ask themselves, plans they need to prepare, given the local conditions that they're dealing with. But it's the sort of a tickler to take them through that thought process.
And I think the other value of those types of general statements is that it perhaps creates a framework for some discussions with your neighboring districts where you can be more specific as to your context, because there's no way the state can understand 1,000 different communities dealing with the amount of data in real time we're dealing with. But we can foster conversations and guidance and resources, and maybe that's that bridge or balance in guidelines versus specifics.
Got it. I appreciate that. That's just a big level question that everybody's wrestling with, and you know different than anybody, if not more so. Some of the questions that are coming in on the chat, I just want to summarize. Put some of them into buckets, and maybe we can address them as some groups. One of the questions that's coming in, looking from Jerry's been working a lot with Philadelphia School District, and just what are you hearing about the fact that we're going into the fall with buildings that have issues, many of them to start with on the capital side, and sort of that intersection of what are the deferred maintenance challenges and how that's maybe compounding some of the thinking. What are you hearing about that? What are you thinking? And what's one of the questions that was specified there is about sort of real tactical level guidance on cleaning. Example, like any kind of, if you could illuminate a little bit of the guidance coming out about cleaning schedules there to think about. That was one question. Another bucket of questions had to do with the outdoors, specifically playgrounds, and then athletics, high school athletics and team sports. So maybe I'll just toss that out to the three of you as first of all, sort of dealing with the reopening in the midst of deferred maintenance challenges, and sort of your guidance around that and thoughts on what you're hearing about that in terms of taking care of that, those capital issues while working on schedules for cleaning recommendations there, and then recommendations around use of playgrounds at the elementary, high school athletics at the high school.
Sure, yeah. Well, we have a huge need here in terms of deferred maintenance here in California. Again, not unique. Many other states I know have the same kind of challenges, and we expect them to continue. Unfortunately, we don't know. What we've been encouraging folks is, we're planning for the reopening in the fall, but we're expecting many districts to reopen at somewhat of a less capacity, right? Not all the students, many districts don't have the space to reopen with physical distancing in mind. And right now, those are part of our assumptions, is that for schools to reopen, you're going to continue your 6 feet of physical distancing. We expect it to be some sort of combination of classroom-based and distance learning programs, depending on the local conditions and depending on the capacity the district has. But what we're also encouraging folks is to be nimble. What the conditions may be in the fall could quickly change, and you may have to go back to completely a distance learning program. So we continue to have those deferred maintenance needs, but we're not sure, to what extent the campus will be fully open and how long it could be maintained open. We're hoping for the best, but we're asking districts to plan for different scenarios to be able to be nimble, to adjust and toggle between, classroom-based and non-classroom-based instruction. There was a few other questions in there too.
Yeah, and then thank you, Juan. And the second other bucket of questions had to do with playgrounds and sports for the athletics, kind of covering the physical activity considerations for elementary through high school.
Yeah, these are the areas that we were relying on others to help us. In terms of playgrounds, it's our understanding that we're going to get additional guidance from our California Department of Public Health, realizing that these are, obviously high-touch areas. Same thing with sports. We have a different association here. We didn't weigh in specifically in our guidance because we knew that there was additional information coming out later that was specific to sports. Right now we're talking about competitive sports, not physical education.
Right.
But let me see if Fred or Jennifer want to add anything there too.
I would add on the deferred maintenance question, how has the pandemic impacted capital projects? I would say that administrators are probably looking at their projects and reprioritizing based on immediate needs for health and safety. And if we prioritize safety, number one, which I think we need to, then that might change what you had planned. So, if you were thinking about, reflooring your gym, and now you're not going to be using the gym in the same ways you thought, but you have windows that don't open mechanically, you may choose to switch and get your windows open so you can have fresh air. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Prioritizing airflow at this moment.
Exactly.
Yeah, and on Jennifer's topic, it's also points out the value of that we all know of having an understanding of what your facility needs are, master plan, condition assessment, and how useful that must have been during this planning process. So it's good to have one.
And how challenging it is if you don't have that. What's your capacity? What's your condition? Right. Those kinds of things.
Right, because there will be something in the future, whether it's COVID, fire, flood, earthquake, that you need that information.
Know thy data. Yes. The other question here, and we'll get to the equity question next, and kind of what you're hearing, those challenges from your representative districts. Several questions coming in about what you're hearing from districts and what you're thinking in terms of challenges with staff reduction, staff maybe not feeling comfortable coming back, particularly on those critical staff needed to, as far as cleaning, obviously teaching, cleaning, transportation, all of these key, this is what we do as school districts. And what are you hearing from districts, and what guidance are you providing there in terms of looking out for staff protection and protocols, staffing maybe at high risk? What are some of the thinking there?
Yeah, this is obviously a very important area, and we have been hearing concerns, not just from staff, but also from parents, right? And they may not be willing to send their students back, even if the conditions are appropriate at the local level. This is an area that we had we spent a lot of time in our work group. Again, we had members from that represent our labor folks, and we also had management folks. So it's very, very good conversations about protecting staff from the staff perspective, from a management perspective. We do have some information in our guidebook to take those, especially the staff that are more vulnerable, and try to pair them with some potential distance learning opportunities if the district is going to have them. But to keep that in mind and to do make some accommodations for these kinds of folks that may be more vulnerable. Because and again, this is all going to be part of the enrollment projection. How many students are you going to have? How many staff are you going to have? And to develop your instructional program. And again, maybe some will have full reopening. My sense that it's going to be a lot of a blended. Some classroom-based, some non-classroom-based, depending on how many staff and students you're going to have coming back. And then, each LEA will develop their own instructional programs to accommodate the ones that are going to be in the classroom or the ones that are going to be through distance learning programs. Jennifer, Fred, you guys want to touch more on the actual information in the guidebook?
Fred, you go first.
Yeah, and we had another discussion with another group this morning, as equity and all those concerns have existed. Districts have different resources, and maybe this experience has served to highlight some of those equity concerns of access to technology or access to other resources. So it's equity, as we all know, has been a long, perhaps forever, concept that we have to deal with. But with such a massive short-term event, that it just seemed to highlight and put a microscope on areas where there is an inequity.
Our state,
and just to follow up on that, this is something that and it is a big problem here in California. We do have this digital divide, so we've been working hard here at the department with other entities to try and bridge that gap. So we're looking at providing equipment, and connectivity devices as well. So laptops, hotspots, that sort of thing, to make sure that all of our districts, particularly the ones in rural areas, have the capability of having distance learning programs. So this is something that we've been working on. It's a huge undertaking, but we have a lot of people trying to get some of the high-tech companies to donate, and they have been donating equipment and devices to help us out. Some of the other issues come up in terms of transportation in some of the rural districts, that they do have large areas to cover. And, again, keeping physical distancing in mind, we're not going to be able to have 72, 73 students per bus like we could have before. Depending on some of we've been working on some layouts, you may be able to have 9, 10 students. And what does that mean, in terms of additional potential bus stops? And just to touch a little bit more on the transportation side, part of our guidebook that we had too, we're talking about access to campus and potentially doing health screenings. And when we talk about access to the campus, it's not just the entry point to the school grounds. We're also considering, well, what about the bus stop? If we're going to have health screens, before students get on a bus, we're going to have them there and addressing those kind of challenges. Face coverings is a big issue here in California. Right now, the state is going to be providing personal protective equipment to schools to at least reopen for the first 60 days. And we're looking at hand sanitizers, face coverings, face shields for teachers, thermometers. So, we're looking, in fact, we're actually providing orders to each county to meet their needs. And this is a challenge because we don't know. We don't know who's going to be, how many students and staff are coming back to campus. So we're looking at just total student and staff counts to come up with some numbers We've been working very closely with the California Office of Emergency Services, with our Department of General Services, who is the procurement arm of the state, and the governor's office to be able to order some of this equipment to help schools reopen in the fall. And again, this is just to get schools reopened for the first 60 days. After that, we're going to be working on some additional support, so that maybe perhaps the school districts can tap into the supply chain. But for now, the state is going to be providing some equipment. And again, this does tackle the equity issue, because we can't ask all students to come in to school with say a face covering. They may not be able to. So providing everybody the equipment that we believe is necessary to ensure the health and safety is critical, and that's one of the areas that we're working on to help them be able to reopen in the fall.
And I would add a couple other areas of possible equity would be indoor air quality. Schools have a variety of different HVAC systems. Some might be a modern system with the MERV 13 rated filters that are screening virus, and others might not be as strong a system for the airflow to be able to handle those more restrictive filters. Or maybe it's a district that doesn't have air conditioning at all, and so they're thinking, well, we need to have our windows open then, and so are all the windows opening? Are they doing manual ventilation? And so I think there are a variety of different ways that school districts are going to be working to create improved indoor air quality for their students and staff. And then another area that I think might be a consideration for equity is just green spaces. If we're encouraging that it's a good idea to go outside for learning, because just a greater fresh air there. And now we're not saying, go out into a tent, because in California, schools facilities need to pass the Field Act, but they can take a clipboard and go sit outside under a tree. But that sounds like might be a more capable in a suburban district to do something like that. What about a large urban school? Do they have the green space to have the same opportunities to go outside? So that might be, again, a project that a school might take on, is to develop some green space to have outdoor learning capabilities.
Yeah, interesting. So the equity categories that I heard you all talk about was access to technology, that this situation has just put a spotlight, and that's what rings true, as we've heard a lot. This is just highlighting current equity challenges, and gaps in terms of access to technology, access to green space, which you were just talking about, Jennifer, and indoor air quality, issues, basically age of mechanicals and systems and their upkeep. So and then the PPE side, taking care of that through state level procurement down to the district for 60 days. That's interesting. So that's good to hear. So transportation. Yeah, and question on that one. I mean, we can that's for many districts that I've spoken with, that is the bottleneck. And several states have many of the state guidances that I've read and heard from are more, say, loose on that particular issue. That's a little squishy when it comes to social distancing on buses. Some say it's recommended but not required. Some require it. So when you look at this issue of social distancing on buses, what goes into your calculations in providing that guidance, and in what circumstance would you see from the state level where that would go from a more strict, basically 7 to 11 kids on a 77 passenger bus, to a higher percentage? Where do you see what triggers would cause that to relax in your mind?
Well, again, we're looking at this from the student and staff safety perspective. In terms of loosening the guidelines for physical distancing, that will not be our call. I think that's going to be the public health officials.
Got it.
Oh, but we discussed this quite a bit too, and how could we protect students and staff? There was some mention of plexiglass on school buses. We had conversations with our not just our Department of Motor Vehicle staff, but also our California Highway Patrol, who largely opposed to that because during an accident that could be worse for students, and that
exactly right.
It could also hurt the integrity of the school buses when you start drilling things. But face shields was also something that came into mind. For at least the staff level, face coverings for the students coming in and out of the buses, that could be helpful. The zigzagging of assigning students to seats, could be helpful as well. So there's different ways that this could help. But right now, again, our assumption is that physical distancing will continue, and trying to do what we can to help ensure that we have that physical distancing, knowing that this is going to pose some great challenges if we can have, if we're going to be having a lot fewer students on the bus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe what are you hearing, from districts about, the social distancing on buses and screening on buses? What's some of what you're hearing, and what's some of the, if you could summarize some of the guidance in terms of health screenings on a bus? Are we talking parent attestation? Do you have to have a temperature check before you get a bus? Could you summarize a little bit about the thinking in that?
Yeah, so each, this is something that, let me highlight one of the concerns. So even if we do have, screenings before students enter on the bus, because there was concerns that, if you do it afterwards, then you might, infect other students and potentially the bus driver as well. But if you do it before, and what if a student does have a high temperature? We are encouraging, and we're not specifying the type of plans, but the school districts have, in terms of developing a plan to make sure that they return home safely. This is no different than when a student, walks to school, enters the campus, and there's a health screening there. What if they do have a high temperature? What if they do show symptoms? So, we do have some guidance in our guidebook about that. But mostly, this is one of the areas that we thought, that each school district can develop their own plans to ensure that the students return home safely, whether it's before they board the bus or before they enter on campus. But this is a big challenge, not having the same amount of students per bus route. So we know that this is a concern from our LEAs, and we're trying to do what we can to help them. But it's very challenging to do physical distancing, on a bus and still being able to maintain your schedules, your routes. Potentially, you may have to increase the routes, but that, increases costs too, right? So you don't have shortage of bus drivers. Exactly. Yes. Well, and right now we're also dealing with some testing requirements here in California and trying to help them make sure that, the bus drivers are ready to go come fall. But yeah, more challenges and questions than we have answers there right now.
Yeah.
One of the things, I've been thinking about, if parents or others are not comfortable with a bus ride, there's going to be more people driving their child to school, you would think, which means more traffic out in front of your school, just bigger traffic jams and neighbors' driveways being blocked, and the whole host of issues that go with that. Assuming, most of the kids are back in school. So there is that secondary effect. If they aren't on the bus, they got to be somewhere, and what's the effects of that somewhere? So, yeah, sorry we don't have the answer, but
no,
we've been holding out.
if you had the answer, we may not be on this webinar. So part of the reason we're doing this. And not to harp too long, we can pivot away from this capacity discussion on the bus, but it is really driving, pun intended, the a lot of the scheduling discussions around that. So what I'm hearing is well, wow. I initially heard a lot of A-Day, B-Day considerations, and then I heard a lot of chatter around, well, then when you ran the transportation modeling around that got super complicated, and challenges of cleaning and cross-contamination. So I heard folks talking about A week, B week kind of considerations, or all high schoolers stay home and the elementary and middle schoolers spread out among the 3 grade levels of facilities. What are the kind of strategies that you're hearing from your districts in terms of how to really deal with this enormous scheduling challenge that really is put in place when you social distance on a bus?
That's another big section of our guidebook in terms of the instructional programs, the instructional scheduling. And this is also going to have an impact, again, not just, space allocation at each school, but also, the space needs on buses. But all of that's going to, I think, be a factor when districts make the determination to deliver their instructional programs and consider the things in terms of the 2-day rotational blended learning, like Mondays, Wednesdays for grades K through 3, and then Tuesday, Thursdays for grades 4 through 6. That's one of the models. We have these all listed in our guidebook, but the AB that you mentioned is another one that we highlight in terms of the blended learning program. Early and late staggered schedules, that might be helpful too. But again, part of it is going to be dependent on the projected enrollment, right, in terms of the students and staff, and then determining your capacity needs at the school and on the bus. That's why it seems like there will be a lot of combination in terms of distance learning and classroom-based, just for the sheer fact that you may not have the capacity. Again, each district is going to be different, each school is going to be different, but that's why we're including some of these different models for districts to consider. We're not specifying which one they should use. We encourage a lot of community engagement here, with their parents, with the educators, with the community to determine what's going to work best. We do know that a lot of districts right now here in California are sending out surveys to parents to determine what will be their preference, come fall in terms of having classroom-based or distance learning programs. That's going to be part of the factor, in terms of finalizing their plans. I don't think that I mentioned this earlier, but we also have a community engagement section too. Communication is going to be key. I think everybody knows that, but having the right engagement process at the local level is going to be key to making these decisions, not just working with your public health officials, but also with your educators, your parents, your community. Fred, Jennifer, you guys want to add anything on the instructional models?
No, I think that, just as we hear more and more, we're learning more, and one of the complications perhaps may be people indicate they want a virtual learning for their child, and then they show up on the first day of school, and now you have to take them. What's your contingency plans? So just another layer of uncertainty.
Sure. In redundancy and planning. Jennifer as well?
Just
are you hearing?
That the districts are encouraged to be flexible and to provide, a few options in order to retain maximum enrollment. Because if a family doesn't feel like you're able to serve their needs, their concerns, then they might look elsewhere, right? So that's the key advice, is to be flexible and to provide as many options as you can do well in your school to serve the students and the staff, families.
One of the questions that came up quite a bit ago, and just by the way, we'll go ahead and we'll send out these chat notes here, but you're always welcome to save it if you want to look at it. There's 3 little dots. You can click on that, save it. There's a lot of rich conversation going on in the chat, and I'm doing my best to keep up with it as we go. Questions that came back before came to digital online learning, is that being required or recommended of all school districts? I think it seems like sort of at this point assumed that everybody needs to have a robust digital online program available for students and families to select. I'm assuming that's what you're hearing or recommending, and could you speak to that a little bit? And then how is that, how you see that at the state level being operationalized? State LEAs organizing it. What's the status there for online learning?
It would be organized at the LEA level as far as the way that they want to deliver their education. And I forget what the first part of your question was, sorry.
No, it's okay. Just the recommendation for online learning, is that something that every district is required to come up with? Or is it recommended? That was a question that popped up. And then sort of a question that sort of really hinges on that, it just came in at the last end of the chat, is, for variable schedules and coming up with different options in terms of A-day, B-days, or staggered start times, real challenge, of course, for families and sort of to get back to work. So those in childcare and those kinds of questions. So what's some of the thinking and the wrestling around childcare, around staggered start times, and allowing folks to get back to work while also providing safety and distancing in schools? How are you recommending folks spread out at schools to maximize the capacity without getting too close? So kind of what's the thinking in that respect?
I'll answer the first part of the question, and then unfortunately, I'm thinking about 2 more minutes. I'm going to have a hard stop. I apologize, but
it's fine. No, it's
I will
fine.
leave you in the very capable hands of Fred and Jennifer. So the online requirement, that really depends on the state's stay-at-home orders, and then ultimately the counties, the public health officials, what they recommend in terms of requiring folks to stay at home. Obviously, when this all started, that was a requirement here in California. So we and that's what we try to do, is to help strengthen the school district's online programs, because we did not want school to stop. So I think a lot of it depends on the external factors regarding stay-at-home orders. If I think maybe we, as part of the assumption is, come the fall, we are part of the assumption is that the stay-at-home orders are lifted and schools can reopen. This is when it's going to be up to each school district to make determinations of what kind of instructional program they're going to deliver, assuming that those stay-at-home orders are lifted. If they're back in place, then obviously that won't be an option.
Got it. Well, and I know you've got to jump here, Juan. I just wanted to thank you very much for rearranging your schedule to take the time to be with us today. And again, many thanks to you, and we'll make sure to get you this recording and all the notes as well.
No, thank you. Thank everyone. Again, Fred and Jennifer will be on for the remainder of the call to take any other questions. But
perfect.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And then, kind of adding to this whole scheduling and capacity mix, and obviously this last slide here is just a smorgasbord of various questions that really we can take as time and conversation dictate. But campus security, that's a question that came up a couple times here. And, scheduling is having to be rethought. Notions about what a secure campus looks like is having to be rethought on the fly. What kind of recommendations, guidance is CDE looking at in terms of thinking about just our school security and how we've thought about that in terms of single points of entry when possible, and secure perimeters, and now we're talking about teaching outside under a tree and spreading out, and just really much look forward to your feedback in that respect.
Yeah, I think in some ways when we put in some of our discussions and guidance, that may be complementary of security is that you have controlled points of access so that you can take temperatures or what other triaging activities you do. Realizing that most campuses were never built for that intent, and it's going to be awkward in many cases to do that. And also now that we have kids spread out much more. So if it's a large spread out campus, and in California, we can run a high school of 4,000 kids. So you may need more security because you have to cover a greater area, more security, patrols or guards or whatever that is. If that was sort of the aspect of about the security in COVID, there may be some complementary activities that can occur with controlled access, but may also be some different challenges that we just may not know about yet.
I'd like to go back and pick up childcare real quick, because we didn't talk about that.
Go for it.
So some things to keep in mind. It may be that the childcare needs to stay open. If you have before school and after school programming, then maybe those need to be open all the time for students who absolutely need to have care on campus. Another way to think about it is to have more of your elementary students present every day and rotate your older students because they are able to supervise themselves theoretically, and younger ones can't. And that allows parents then to go to work. We've been dealing with childcare for our first responders and essential workers already. So childcare centers have been open, and there's a lot we can learn from the work that they're already doing about how to serve children and that need to be in childcare. But just one other idea I want to share, and it's one that I picked up actually in your Thursday webinars, talking to another representative from another state, and that they were going to partner with their agencies like Boys and Girls Club and YMCA to provide alternative programming on the days and times the students are not on the campus, and then make those spaces, that YMCA campus or the Boys and Girls Club campus, make those also food distribution sites for the days that kids are not on campus. So kind of a partnership that way. And I thought that was really creative and a good idea for those that it might work with. There'll be transportation, issues with that, but depending if Boys and Girls Club is next door, then you've got an opportunity there.
Yeah, and that's those kind of public-private partnerships. Hearing a lot about that, and partnering with public transit, partnering with YMCA's and Boys and Girls Clubs. And one of the challenges that I hear in that is that we're looking at planning some pretty Herculean efforts for social distancing on buses and schools, and then if we outsource childcare or other forms of transportation, just making sure that the partners we're working with are keeping up with that same level of vigilance, lest we, have some of that work undone. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And as we close in the next few minutes here, I think maybe this bottom right question would be, I think, something that we could. And I apologize, I didn't get to all the questions in the chat, but we'll see what we can get in the upcoming seminars and some of these questions as well. But all of these different solutions to the challenges of transportation, of capacity, of security, of food distribution, of technology acquisitions, all of this is dollar signs in my head and in everybody's head. The costs to do these things increase while we're looking at general decreases in budget. And there's been CARES Act that's come through and in many ways has come and gone. Some dollars are still there, There's bills working its way through the House and Senate right now that provide right now a proposal for $100 billion for schools. We'll see where that goes. It's in the Senate right now. But we're talking about large increases in cost operations for many folks. What are you hearing? What are you just providing some thoughts around about where there might be some need to look at things like some policy changes or some sort of funding that would be set up in a part to help out districts? Because what I'm hearing is we need to do all these things. How can we afford it? We're getting a budget cut. You can provide some thinking in that respect, some comment?
Yeah, and it's probably no different than most states where at a time of a dramatic cost increase, you are seeing a forecasted budget decrease. And in California, and I don't know how others, that we base our funding largely upon enrollment or average daily attendance, which is different than enrollment.
Right.
And that's been one of the ideas tossed out, is to be based on enrollment, because there's so much virtual or transitioning that ADA is just not perhaps the best measure in this time frame.
Right.
And then as well as the charter schools could, because of greater flexibility, maybe offer some other options for students and parents along the way, which a district may have now other fiscal losses on that. So I know that that's an ongoing debate as to how it resolves.
Yeah, that ADA, Fred, that's a big one. Heard a lot from different LEAs.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that people are advocating to be amended or relaxed for this coming school year.
Which in California is also an equity issue versus our basic aid districts and all that other school financing stuff. But it could highlight and exacerbate some of the equity concerns. So just another complication. And the department under Tony Thurman is taking where we've been very supportive and flexible in our work with districts in required forms and the like. And I know Governor Newsom, as is standard in many emergencies, does issue executive orders that provide some relief on processing deadlines, other laws and regulations that are helpful for districts in that area. Unfortunately, I just guess there's not an answer yet on that. And once there is an answer, will it be a good answer? Other than less money, more work.
Sure, and that's obviously we're in. Jennifer, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just going to add, your insurance company, there was the CARES Act money. Here, in California, we're sending out supplies. Your county office might have supplies, or your county office of health might have supplies if you're a school district that's in need, like have a high low-income population. And then lastly, think about FEMA. There's a public assistance opportunity with FEMA, and it's open right now. LEAs are eligible to apply. And, that's another place where you can get up to 75% of your excessive costs reimbursed. It'll take a lot of paperwork and diligence in your record keeping, but that's another way to possibly recoup some of your expenses.
Yeah, thank you. And Jennifer, Fred, as we wrap up here, we're just at time. Can you leave us on a sort of a slight of an up note here, thinking about districts that you've worked with, or where have you seen some creative, successful ways to gain some of these resources through FEMA, through the county, through obviously the state's giving the PPE, which is huge, to school districts directly. But where have you heard some LEAs finding some creative successes in obtaining some of the resources that they need to help offset their costs.
So you want to hear a FEMA success story? Is that what you're?
The white whale.
Well,
I know
maybe
there is a
look
lot
beyond FEMA.
of
More broad here. Yeah.
and like Ian here is from Coalition for Adequate School Housing, and there are, you know, the associations, CASBO, CSBA, California School Board Association, all the agencies, associations are all focused on providing information to districts on that. So on how to approach this, whether there's been that success, I don't know. I've heard just from watching the web pages of some of the local districts, a lot of it is that community strength and collaboration with partners for, you know, donations for cleaning supplies or this or that.
Technology also, technology donations, hotspot donations, partnering with industry. It's a good time to ask for help from industry.
Yeah, you know, which is what districts are well versed in engaging their community in that help. And I know the state is doing a lot, as is all states in the federal government, to provide more resources, both in kind, like we're doing with the masks and sanitizer that the state is providing, and money. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, the need's bigger than the budget. And you know, what choices do you make to maximize? Again, going back to maybe the value of having all those planning documents in line ahead of time, so you can do the most cost-effective, biggest bang for your buck type decisions.
That's a good point, Fred. You know, when you think biggest bang for your buck, you know, what we know is distancing and masks and washing our hands, those non-pharmaceutical interventions are the most effective at reducing the spread. So, you know, maybe don't dive right into redoing your whole HVAC system if you don't have the funds for that. You know, look at what priorities you can make in your facility plans that will give you the
open
most
windows, get masks, wash hands, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. So,
Sure.
Yeah,
Well,
you could spend a lot of money on you know, remote motion censored stuff. Cost a lot of money. Is that the best benefit for your limited money? You know, those types of.
I can give you one anecdote from myself as a superintendent. When we went through N1H1, I went and changed out all my faucets to those sensor ones so the kids wouldn't be putting their hands on the faucet. And not long after that, realized that the kids could adjust those. The faucets were going on when the doors opened. They were going on all day long. And so if I could just give a little, you know, personal advice from my own experience, get the metered faucets. So whenever you just touch them just once and then they give a little water and then they turn themselves off, it has the same effect and the kids can't monkey with them and they're cheaper.
So, which sort of might be a time to reconvene after in January when we can all share our lessons learned in this format.
Well, yeah, and our plan here is just to continue the conversations through the fall, because, you know, we need to plan ahead. We need to share stories and learn from each other. And then we need to keep the conversation going in the fall. And how's it going? What's actually working? What's actually not? And how do we adapt in real time as insofar as possible? So we will keep that going. Jennifer, Fred, thank you both very much for coming. There's lots of really great links in here, everything from athletic plans, from, I think, Rob in Iowa. We've got stuff on from ASBO, FEMA. There's the last post there. There's information about the Rebuilding America School Act that's in right now in this passed through the House. So that Jeff posted. So go ahead and download. You can download the chat. We'll send it out as well, an email to follow. But Jennifer, Fred, thank you very much for your time, folks. Thanks for spending an hour.
David, one quick last plug, and I didn't see Mary listed here. But we have been really relying upon your group's work and putting it out there for others to use and resources. So I didn't want to say blatantly stealing, but we're relying heavily upon a lot of what we learn here. So we really appreciate just having this forum to understand we're all kind of finding our way through this, but that there's a wide body of resources we can all draw on. So thanks.
Well, Fred, thank you. And since, we're out of school, this isn't cheating. It's called collaboration. Now, if it's in school, you're sharing notes, that's cheating. But here, yeah. So thanks, everybody. This is very much a group effort and will continue to be so. We will continue toggling back and forth between looking at district views. We're going to look at small rural districts. We're going to look at, we just talked with the state of California. We're bouncing around. That's very intentional. We want to have a diverse perspectives here throughout the summer to get some insights from as many angles as we can in our time. So have a wonderful rest of your evening. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you next week. Look for our emails coming out with our interviewee for next Thursday. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you. You're welcome.